Life happens, and not always the way we expect it to. Every single day, we face change, stress, and uncertainty. What if you could learn to thrive no matter what life throws your way? Resilience expert Adam Markel and his inspiring guests explore breakthrough strategies to fully embrace change and build the resilience required to become change-proof.
Well, you're going to love this episode of the Change Proof Podcast because today I have Bill Nussey. Bill has spent most of his career as a tech CEO, helping lead several startups to successful exits, including an IPO. His companies have created billions of dollars in shareholder value. And in 2016, he left the tech industry to join the climate revolution. It started with a TED Talk, which grew into a #1 podcast on renewable energy, and most recently, a book called Freeing Energy, which was the #1 new release in energy on Amazon. Stay tuned for this episode. You're going to love it. All right, Bill, you have a very impressive bio for sure. My question to you right out of the gate is, what's one thing, just one thing that's not a part of that bio and your sort of standard fare introduction, that kind of stuff? What's one thing that you would love for people to know about you?
Early on in my life, when I thought maybe I would do well professionally, a mentor sat me down and said, Bill, and to my wife, he said, I know both of you, and every dime you make should not go towards buying anything or any place. He said it should go towards going places and doing things. And that was one of the best pieces of advice. And we've always been modest in our things we own. We're very fortunate, but we have spent our marginal money on going places. And our kids, who are now young adults, have traveled all over the world with us in multiple adventures. And that has been the funnest, most bridge building or bond building experiences I could have had as a member of this family.
Wow. And you and your wife have 2 kids, right? Is that right?
We do. 2 adult kids, 22 and 26.
Wow. You know what? That's some really sage advice right there. Folks that know a little bit of my background, married my college sweetheart, 30 plus years. I won't say the exact number, but it's more than 30 years ago. And
me too, my friend. Me too.
And one of the things we said when we first got together, as in we're both aware that we were in love. At a certain point, Randy, my wife, she looked at me and she said, you know what, let's never get boring, and this is that kind of out of character for her. It wasn't the kind of thing she would say. It's not like a line out of her book or playbook, but she said that. And so I really paid attention and I thought, well, yeah, let's never get boring.
I love it.
Yeah. And I feel like it's in line with that advice that your mentor gave you, to invest in experiences, invest in, what was the word you used earlier to describe it? That
to me, it's always been adventures. It's the bonds between our family, but how do we live our life so that we have adventures? We go new places. We think new things. Occasionally we're scared. We all climbed, the 4 of us, none of us are athletes remotely, and we all climbed to the top of the mountain next to Machu Picchu a few months ago. And for the 4 of us, this was terrifying, exhausting, and what a great experience to have done it with our family. Of course, there were other people there just going right up to like mountain goats, just climbing right up of it, and we're just looking at them. But for us, it was quite a climb, and those kind of things you never forget, never ever forget.
My goodness, Bill. Yeah, exactly. I mean, with our 4 kids, I think in part, we went through a period where, for budgetary reasons, with 4 kids, like, oh my God, 4 kids, it's a lot of food. It's a lot of clothing. Even with hand-me-downs and stuff, it's a lot, a lot of tuition. You and I have something in common because your youngest is about to graduate and you're going to be, theoretically speaking, an empty nester, right? I mean,
yes. Well, he moved out years ago, but he comes home for Christmas breaks and summers. But theoretically, he will be on the launch pad in May towards a career living somewhere that isn't our house. And I'm kind of say to myself, boy, it wouldn't be all too bad if you end up living with us. But then again, he's got to get out on his own. So we love having him around. We're very lucky that we all get along.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is maybe for more for the parents out there or wannabe parents or whatever. And so if you're not a parent at the moment, you don't have any clue about or wanting desire to be a parent, just bear with us. Don't fast forward just yet. Okay. I promise we're going to get past this, but tell me about how adventurous your kids are. Cause I want to tie this. So I'll give this for the people that are maybe a little impatient, right? I'm going to tie this. I want to tie this to business. I want to tie this to entrepreneurship. I want to tie this to the things that are really relevant in most of our lives these days. So, are your kids the adventurous type or kind because you've taken them on these wild experiences
Yes.
from early on?
They've had to face their fears, and we push them within reason and safety. But we have pushed them to do things, to get jobs before their other friends had jobs. We pushed them to travel and to hike places and to try things. We put them on dirt bikes when they were probably too young to do dirt bikes. And we taught them to build computers from scratch before they were too young to build computers from scratch. So it was the whole range of things, but we got them out of their comfort zone over and over again. I think it's really affected their outlook on life, and hopefully they'll end up becoming happy adults, which is all you could possibly hope for.
Okay, so here's the tie-in, everybody. So, Bill, as a tech founder, a startup founder, spent a lot of years in tech. How important is it, do you think, this spirit of adventurousness, to that arena that you've spent pretty much your whole career in?
Adam, it's everything. It isn't just a nice to have. If you want to do the kind of startups that most people read about, that and even far less famous ones that I've been a part of, but I've been in the startup world my whole life. And if you think if you're not signing up for an adventure, the slogs and the fears and the heart-wrenching, soul-crushing moments and the glorious ecstasies of success and winning, if you don't want to get on that roller coaster, it's not for everybody. And for people that do want to do that, they want to leave a trail behind them, that want to have an experience that with friends that are going to last their lifetimes. And I think startups are the way to go. I ran a company many years ago and took it public, and we got to a largest about 3,000 people. And I was CEO, and there's about 15 of us that have 20 years later remained great friends. And every single year we get back together. And normally that would be your high school friends or something, or your college friends, but it's the executive team of this company that we built, and we remain great friends to this day. And so I think that it was the incredible adventure of that particular company that bonded us for life.
Yeah. I mean, the bond, I think, is the word you said earlier with regard to your family. Yeah. And now we're back to that word bond again, which is really, really important. What is it, do you think, about being on an adventure in business in particular, that creates that kind of a bond? And is it something that can be replaced? This is kind of a two-part question here, and I think this is the harder part. Can it be replicated somehow without the painful moments of uncertainty?
I think that going on a journey with another group of people, your family, colleagues, one that's got highs and lows, is defining, because it forces you to be human. If you have a polished veneer, which we all have, most startups I'm familiar with will tear it down. And you get to see the actual person that's there. And sometimes that's not the person you want to be seen as. Sometimes it's different than what you thought of your colleague before the adventure. But that raw humanity is what causes people to bond, in my opinion. When we were near the middle of that mountain I was telling you about, one of my family members, not me, could have easily been me, just lost it and said, "This is too hard. I don't want to do it. This is terrifying. We could die." There was no safety nets. It was just a sheer 1,000-foot drop, a foot away from where we were standing. And we just sort of sat there with talking about it. And eventually, my family member was very upset. And we just sat there until they weren't upset anymore. And we continued on our way up. And when getting to the top was even more amazing, because we had to stop in the middle and be just absolutely authentic with each other. I don't like that word authentic, because it's actually an inauthentic term, but just the rawness.
Thank you for saying that, by the way.
Yeah. It's the rawness of who you are.
Don't you think it's sort of like transparent? I mean, I've been kind of calling not so much BS on that word authentic, but it's been used a lot.
Well, it's used in the context of how you're supposed to present yourself, which automatically means it's not authentic.
Right, exactly. Here's me not selling you.
This is my PR agent wants to tell you about me.
Right. This is
authentically.
Yeah. I mean, it's a level of transparency. There's some interesting stuff. I was reading an article about some politics. Actually, this is freaking funny as heck, I think, to me. I'm reading an article about this young woman who's, I think, 22 years old. And I wish I had the article handy. So I won't, we'll insert her name, hopefully. I mean, the AI will be so ready for us very soon that I'll just be able to say that anyway. It'll happen. But basically, she came on board with the Raphael Warnock campaign some months ago, and he had a good following already, and some of his social was pretty powerful, but had no presence on TikTok. And so she comes in and she starts doing some things and sprinkling, TikTok dust or whatever. And then he grows to like 250,000 followers on TikTok, but mostly because she was sharing these moments of transparency, what she calls these cringeworthy, like the embrace the cringe is kind of her thing at 22 or something. And it's just like this, and she was just featured in a very major publication. So for sure, her star is rising, to be sure. But this idea of sort of embracing the cringe, like when we're looking at what does authenticity mean, or transparency, even, it's like in today's world, there's some element of there's a lot of cringe, right? I mean, on all, everywhere, can you embrace that? I think it's this book I had come out earlier in the year called Change Proof. The original title was the word embrace. And it was to be a follow-up from a book I'd written a few years ago called Pivot. And so this was more of a starting around how do we embrace the pivots in life, embrace the changes in our lives, which is kind of along those lines of embracing the cringe, because the changes in our lives are often super messy and they're ugly in there, because we're also scared. Like I can imagine being on that mountain and somebody's literally just like having an OSM. My buddy likes to call that the oh shit moment, and that's what's happening. And when you're having that moment, wherever that moment is happening, it doesn't have to be in a mountain, right? It's like you're kind of an ugly mess. I mean, a beautiful ugliness, right?
Exactly. And that's when the people, when you're feeling this fear and this uncertainty, and when the people around you, whether your colleagues or your family, sort of rally around you and say, but we'll get through this, fail or succeed, we're going to do it together. And that shows the commitment people have to each other. And that's what forms the bonds in my experience. Is if I'm willing to help you here, of course I'm going to help you for the rest of your life in other ways. And I think that raw humanity, the transparency, you are shed of the version of yourself you'd want to tell TikTok about, and you're replaced with who you actually are. Yeah. And I think a lot of people suffer from, I know I do, I think the term is imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
And so we, in the world of social media, we are getting ever skilled at presenting who we would like the world to see us as, and further from who we really are. Maybe sounds a little deep for me, but I do think that's reality. So when you're in a situation that forces you to get beyond that veneer, and there's people around you and they're still there for you, man, that's what makes those relationships so powerful and special. And that's what I've loved about being an entrepreneur my entire life, is that every company that I've built and run with a team, every single one is it's the greatest adventure. And the friendships and the bond, occasionally the burned relationships and people they never talk to again. But the vast majority, at least in my experience, have been people that even if they don't end up working out for the company, in many cases, they end up being lifelong friends because you've just been through the trenches together.
Yeah. Would you be willing to share like where the imposter syndrome has shown up for you, either recent or in the past?
Sure. so really famous podcasters reaching out to me saying, "Hey, would you like to be on our podcast?" And like you. And it's like, well, what could I possibly, especially talking about my life? I mean, what could I possibly share with anybody they would find interesting and relevant? And I'm still quite in doubt that anything I say today will be of value to anyone that listens to this. But I trust your judgment, and sufficiently flattered to be invited that I'm willing to give it a shot. But anytime you're pitching a startup or pitching yourself, particularly, you're like, well, what if people find out that all these faults I actually have and all these mistakes I've actually made, and what if they find out about it? And I think that's a fine line we walk in business. You're not as one of my great moments in life was a friend of mine was an ex-Israeli military top level person, and there was a night before I resigned, before my resignation from this large public company I was mentioning earlier, and it wasn't announced, but I was with him and I told him and confided him. And I said, when we announced that I'm leaving, I'm going to go to a startup, but I feel like my career is going to be over. And it was just 2 months ago, I won this massive award as the most, the most innovative consultant in the world or something like that. And he said, and I said, I'm just struggling with this. And he said, listen, Bill, I've been called a savior of a country, and I've been called a criminal by the same group of people from the country I'm from. And he said, the one thing I've learned is that I'm not nearly as good as everyone says, and I'm not nearly as bad as they say. And maybe that doesn't resonate, but with everybody, but boy, did it hit me at the time that I am not the things that people say about me. Now, I'm not nearly as good, and I'm certainly not as bad. In the end, I'm just me. And it was beginning a real process for me. It was in my early 40s when I started to realize that I was just going to lean into who I was and accept some of the things I was never going to be good at, that I idolized in other people. I was never going to be the charismatic, go charge the hill kind of person. I'm more of we call it more of a Spock brain than a Kirk brain, if anyone's old enough to remember that reference. But I owned it, and I've been a much happier person and maybe more successful. I don't know.
That really Bill, that couldn't be more on point for me at just this moment, because was sitting in a hot tub just a couple of days ago. Was our son's birthday, his 24th birthday. We went out and played golf and came home, and just as dinner was being prepared, we decided to just go sit in the tub and continue to catch up. We been fortunate to spend a whole day playing golf together, so we did some of that. But our conversation went deeper than it would typically go on, like in between shots and stuff. And we were sharing some stories, both he and I, from our high school days. I obviously my high school days a little further back than his. Yeah. But I was sharing some things he didn't know about me that I was concerned about back then, like things I worried about, things that were bothering me, things I didn't like about myself, to be, like really on point. And he was sharing some of those same things with me that I actually didn't know that he was worrying and like really obsessing about back then. That just like, I couldn't believe it. I'm like, really? Like you're worried about that? You were, upset about that, wanting to change that. Just couldn't believe it, and I shared one, like I wasn't going to be 6 feet tall. My dad's 6'2". Was a basketball player. And for, I don't know, some good period of my early life, I was upset that I wasn't going to be 6 feet tall, that I wasn't going to get to do some of that, or somehow that number of just even what my physical height was would somehow equate to a certain level of acceptance or love or approval or worthiness, like bizarre. Like I look back then and it's laughable, but it was hardly laughable at that time. So I had said to Max, our son, I said, it's really about objective truth. Don't you think, Max? Like if you look back, if I look back at that time in my life and think about the stories I was telling myself, or even the things other people might have said to me that I accepted as the objective truth. Either one of those two scenarios were both false. My story about myself, as well as the story that others might have been telling about me, which objectively false, but I didn't know that then, and not sure I could have known that then. But I look back on it and it's obvious, just like he looks back on his thing. And I was saying to him, so is that objectively true? Because he's only 24. So it's not that far from the point where those things were really concerning to him. And I think on some level still a little, concerning. So it's really, this imposter syndrome, I think, is something that again, it's one of those terms we're now sort of go, oh, get it, know what that is. And yet it's so prevalent, especially in people, regardless of how successful they are on either part of the spectrum. A question for you that I wrote down, I want to ask you now is, do you think more people talk themselves into things or out of things relative to that whole imposter syndrome bit?
Good question. I think many more people talk themselves out of it. There's 1,000 reasons to say no, and usually very few, if any, logical, objective reasons to say yes. Whether, I asked my wife to marry me, there was the logic, the spreadsheet didn't have an answer, so I just knew I had to do it. Thankfully, she said yes. But I think the greatest decisions, the most consequential decisions, are rarely objectively clear answers. So I think depending on whether you have a taste for adventure, taking the leap, so to speak, I think it's one of the reasons a lot of people sort of wake up 10 years later and say, gosh, I didn't really do a lot in the last 10 years, because they kept finding the reasons to say no to whatever crazy crap that came up from their lives. And what is it? There's a saying, I forget who said it, but something like, never has anyone at their deathbed said, I wish I'd traveled less.
Right.
And so I think there's an
those
adventure.
Things we don't do, or the things that, if you look back, you go, geez, what's the worst case scenario? Like watching, I don't know if are you a music guy, a music fan?
Not much, no.
Okay. So then this is completely irrelevant to you. But that said, Bill, I know you've been involved in the tech space, and but you heard of a guy named Bruce Springsteen? That ring a bell? That
is a name I've heard. Yeah, I
that
think
name
I've
you've heard.
concert,
Okay,
actually.
cool.
Yeah,
so right, everybody has, right, regardless if they were music or not.
Yes.
So I'm watching Howard Stern interviewing Bruce Springsteen, and it's on HBO Max, because I don't actually have. I think he's on Sirius or something, or XM. Those two have merged or whatever. But so I don't listen typically, but I watch this. And so it's Bruce Springsteen. I mean, this guy's, prolific and has won every award and all that kind of stuff. He's talking about just this level of discomfort in what he does in his craft. And I was just thinking to myself, to what extent is that being okay in the space of the unknown, embracing the suck, I think is the term that Navy SEALs use. How much do you have to embrace the suck in as someone who's involved not just in the tech space, but in any area of the startup arena? Like, I have a son-in-law who's got a tech company that's doing quite well, and they're on a pretty good trajectory. And I think ultimately they would love to be, they would love to IPO and all that kind of stuff. I mean, to what extent do you really have to have the belly, the belly, or what is it if it's not that cast iron stomach? What is it with Bruce Springsteen talking about it? There was just a level of his willingness to make this set up this equation for himself was something like, regardless of what happens in this moment, like let's say he was auditioning for his very first record deal with Capitol, and his feeling was, look, I will still be the same person regardless of the outcome. If this thing was to fail, if I was to crash and burn, if I never get a record deal ever in my life, I know who I am, and I'm pretty okay, with who I am. And that was sort of his mindset. And I'd love to get a sense from you as to, what is the mindset of a person that can take something from nothing, meaning you create something out of thin air, and go through it nearly, dying, I don't know, 400 or 500 times, right? To
Definitely.
the place where you have that moment where you're ringing the bell on some exchange, and even the moment when you exit. I know it's a very broad question, but I want to understand the gut head, any of the connections that you can make for us in connection with that.
Well, it leaps to mind a question I've been asked a few times in my career, like, you've had some success, Bill. What have you done differently? How have you embraced all the opportunities and challenges? And the answer I usually give, which is funny but true, which is I'm too stupid to give up. And I think that there's really three kinds of people that can survive the journey of an entrepreneur. The first was somebody who's just so successful that they don't, when there are bad things happening, they just deflect right off, right?
Yeah.
The second kind is the kind that's so courageous and visionary that whenever they see they're running into a ditch or hitting a wall, that they persevere through fear. They just persevere. They understand the bigger picture, then move forward. I'm the third kind, genuinely, and I think most entrepreneurs are. Is that they just you can take a punch, right? You can deal with a level of discomfort that's excruciating for everybody, but you are able to just push through it where others might say it's not worth the trouble. I'm going to get off this crazy pain train as soon as I can, because this is harder than I expected it to be. This is not worth the trouble. And I certainly don't think I'm any more courageous than anybody, but I think my experiences growing up and just the way I'm wired randomly is that I don't have the same problem with climbing through barbed wire as others do. And plus, once I'm vested in something and I'm committed to it, particularly if I'm working with a team, I'm incredibly motivated to get through whatever the downside is. And I do know some people who've just been so successful at everything they do.
Yeah.
But I am not one of those. Any success that I've had has been, there's been a long, hard journey to get there, stuff that I think a lot of people would have chosen not to push all the way through. And for a variety of reasons, some of them are out of weakness, just didn't give up. And, it was probably the most defining story was back in, I think, 2011, if I remember correctly, back before there was any large companies anywhere in the world that had been hacked or compromised. My startup got hacked, and we were the second company in the world we knew of ever get hacked. Google had been hacked by, I think, a foreign country, and everyone was up in arms about that. And it had never happened, right? It happens 3 times a week now, but back then it had never happened. And we called the FBI, and they accidentally leaked it. And so my whole world came tumbling apart. And I had thousands of customers, big brands, and there was the potential that customer data might have been stolen. We were still assessing it, and they all wanted to fire us, and the company was over. And it was easily the most difficult part of my professional career. So one of my executives just up and quit because he thought we were going to spend the rest of our time in jail. Again, there was no precedent, right? Today, if your credit card company calls you and says, so-and-so retailer was hacked, here's what you need to do, change your password or whatever. But back then, no one had any idea whether or not executives would go to jail. And the FBI was not being particularly helpful in a lot of ways. In some ways they were, but, and so that was a crucible for me. And everybody from the board to the employees to the customers were looking at me as if I had the magic answers. And what I decided to do was the next right thing, right? I had no idea how we'd get through it. And I think odds were that we would fail. We would go under in a pile of lawsuits.
Yeah.
And all we could do was the next right thing. So what is the next right thing? Well, let's tell our customers. Well, if we tell our customers, it's going to be this, this, and this. And I said, well, it's the right thing to do. And so we just did that. How do we get this fixed? Well, let's hire the smartest people in the world. Well, we don't have the money to do it. We'll hire them anyway, and to help us fix it. And we did all that. And I think just and the punchline was that we came out of it not just surviving it, but we came out of it incredibly strong. And that actually gave my leadership team and my board like one of those near-death moments you hear about, like someone almost gets in a car crash and they just rethink their whole life. They caused us to stop and think, well, what if we, rather than just thinking about how to get to next year? What if we think incredibly broadly about what we could be? Because we almost died. And we literally almost died. So we reinvented ourselves and the company took off and we ended up selling it for hundreds of millions of dollars to IBM. And it was a great exit for everybody. And I think that had that really bad thing not happened, and had we not had the courage as a management team, the perseverance, not courage, the perseverance just to push through it, I don't think that great outcome would have happened. And everyone was a winner for it, except for the hackers. And they were later caught by the FBI about 6 years later and made quite a court case. But at that point, they'd hacked a lot more people than us. So we were just a small mention in the list of companies that they had done damage to. But we were the first. We were the first to catch it. We had an excellent team. We caught it when no one else was looking for that kind of thing.
Wow. I mean, the do the next right thing, that is...
it's all you can do.
Yeah. And
no plan to get through it.
And yet how hard is that, right? I mean, with no plan to get through it because it's completely unknown territory.
And most everyone agrees you're going to die. I mean, the 90% consensus is you're not going to survive.
Right.
And your career is over, and people's resumes are on the street. Your competitors are pouncing. Hey, you shouldn't work with this company because they got hacked. I mean, some of the most unsavory behavior I've ever seen in my life.
Yeah.
And I called the CEO of one of my competitors. I said, they're coming after our industry. You need to, here's what you need to do. Here's what we learned. Here's how they're going to do it. And a week later, his salespeople were out pitching to our customers because we had been hacked. So there was it was really bad. And we just pushed through it. All of us did. And I think every one of us was a far better business person. And we created a ton of value for our investors and for IBM. And, but boy, walking that line for those 2 or 3 months was excruciating. And and I think a lot of people would have just said, listen, let's just wind it down or whatever. But you know what? We ended up, we only had one tiny lawsuit, and almost every one of the customers we had at the time, thousands, almost every one of them stayed with us. So it was really an amazing lesson to do the right thing.
What a story of resilience. What a resilience journey, really.
Yeah, I wish I didn't have so many of those, but I've got a couple. That may be the answer to your question, right? I mean, how do you get through it? How do you do it?
When your brand is really in so many ways about resilience, like you really are saying to the powers that be, the universe, hey, let me have more of a more fodder for this conversation.
No, I would have preferred to have far fewer soul-crushing experiences in my career.
Just a few less.
That one particularly, but I had a couple, yeah.
Well, I was going to, you answered the question before I asked it. So do you think it's hardest to deal with yourself or with those others that you were referring to, by the way?
I had never thought about it that way. I think it's, the hard to deal with myself doesn't compute with me. And so, I've doubted myself. So maybe that's what you're asking. If I doubted myself, could I get through it? But in every case where I've really faced a crushing situation, there was no one else stupid enough to come in and take the job. I mean, everyone's running for the hills. So getting somebody in would have been nearly impossible. And the only person that would have come in would be a wrecking ball, a Control-Alt-Delete person who shuts it down and starts it over again. And that was never really an option because of all the commitments that I and we had made to our stakeholders. So we had to see it through and die trying if we needed to.
Exactly. Yeah. That's so interesting. The die trying thing. I start a lot of my keynotes. I'm among other things that I do podcasting and
so I've heard
authorship stuff. I love to do the keynote work, and I always start with the same story. I mean, it doesn't matter what my topic happens to be. I start with a story from my days as a lifeguard at the beach at 19 years old, and one of those particular stories has not got a happy ending, and it won't ever have a happy ending. But at a certain point, when we were debriefing this search and rescue that wasn't successful, and our captain, our CEO at the time for the beach, said to us, no one's ever going to go down in our water again or on our watch again. And the command at this point is that you make the save or you die trying. Or you die trying stuff I take really to heart, because that became a mantra in many
That's
ways.
literal for that, for you. That's really a powerful angle. I hadn't heard anything like that before, except the military.
Yeah, it has that flavor to it. But you know what? There's so many life and death. I mean, obviously that was literally life and death content. Yeah. But you know what? When you're managing, and I've been a CEO too of a company that was not as large as the one you were, but when people's livelihoods are in your hands, whether it's 300 people or 3,000 people or whatever it might be, or it's 30 people, there's a responsibility that feels like that, because, for a person who can, to pay their bills, pay their mortgage, pay their have medical insurance, any number of other things that are related to that, as well as the people who invest, put their money in. Maybe it's their retirement funds, it's their their 401k. I mean, who knows what, right? This is just a big ripple effect, for sure.
The way that's always been very visceral for me.
Yeah,
it's other people's money, which I bear more responsibility for than my own. And I think it's, if I've had some successes, part of the reason is I take a great responsibility when people entrust their careers and their money with us, and particularly when it's customers, right? These people go out in their line. If you run a startup, any customer that bets on you is often taking a career risk to put you inside their enterprise. And if you blow up on them, and this happened in the hacking thing, that people that had really bet on us were just getting their heads twisted around by their bosses. Like, why did you pick this company?
Sure.
So yeah, but I think, but while we focus on all the downsides, I think the upside is that the wins are that much more glorious. They're that much more memorable, that much more powerful and transformative. I was just thinking, I hadn't thought about this in 30 years, Adam, but I remember, how you have the senior yearbook and you got this, I don't know about your high school, but I had a senior quote, which I just realized is relevant to this. I said, I want my life to be like a roller coaster. The fun isn't being high or low, but I want to ride the hills. And I just said that when I was like, however old, I was 17. So,
a self-fulfilling prophecy is what that is called.
Seriously, right. And it's not.
That's why when my wife said, when Randy said to me, let's never get boring, I was like, our lives have never been anything but this beautiful,
I love it.
Roller coaster.
And it looks great when you get on a podcast and you're doing a keynote speech, or you're inviting me to talk to your community today. And it all sounds really great. And I guess the point is that the reason you do this and people love to listen to you is that I'm sure some people are in pain and they're struggling and they're trying to figure out if it's worth it, and to know that they're not the only ones that have ever had to go through barbed wire to get where they're going to go through, and that there is hope. It doesn't mean it will work out, but it's probably survivable, other than your lifeguard story. But other than that, stories like that, it's the career stuff. As my friend from the military said, you're not as good or as bad as everybody says. As Bruce Springsteen said, you're just, at the end of the day, you're you.
Yes.
Be that fiercely has been it took me about till my mid 40s to figure that out. But a lot of things I didn't love about my skill set and my, the way I was wired, a lot of things I did like, but in my mid 40s, for a variety of reasons, the world told me just to fiercely be who I was. And exactly. I was a much happier person after that.
I'm a little thick, I'm not the fastest to pick stuff. It's like at some point you go, I'm stuck with myself. Like, yeah, I'm not going to be 6 feet tall. I'm stuck at 5'9.5". That's it. Or 5'9". I probably shrunk by now. So it's like, there's an element of that as being good, objective truth is the point I like
that. Yeah. I work at a venture firm that's tied to some of the largest corporations in the world, in the US, and we held an event at Topgolf the other day. And so
I love that place.
I've swung a golf club maybe 7 times in my life. And so I'm supposed to be, and I'm the host, and we have some of the top executives from these enormous Fortune 100 companies. And so I'm quite nervous about it, and complaining to my wife, and honey, I'm going to look like an idiot in front of these titans of business. And she just looks at me and her wisdom of 30 plus years. And she says, just own it, man. You suck at golf. Just own it. And, and I did. And I was a little embarrassed. I mean, I was like many people golf to say, where does the ball go? to me, it's more like batting average. How many times did I actually hit the ball?
Right.
And I was batting about a 500 on that Top Golf, and they were laughing their butts off at me, but it was all in fun. And it was, I think, I don't think any of them are going to invite me to their country clubs, but it was, and I would have preferred to do something I might be better at, like chess. Chess, I can hold my own, right? Or building a computer network or something that's really nerdy. But we were playing golf, and I owned it, and I had fun. And you know what? They're still returning my phone calls. So,
buddy, I love that. I so love that, Bill. I love that came out. And what you said earlier, I think you're spot on, that the people who are listening to this, there's a lot of very successful people, and success is a very subjective thing anyway. Again, what's the objective truth? I could say, if you're listening right now, if you're watching, listening, whatever it is, there's the objective truth is that you are very blessed, and there's a lot of ways to look at your life and go, well, this is what's missing. That's what's missing. Or that's what I have anxiety about. I mean, there's tremendous amounts of anxiety right now. People are exhausted. Right. And so, just the fact that you can take a moment, even just to think of things in a little bit of a different light, is something of a privilege. It genuinely is, because the alternatives, there are many alternatives that are less of what are less of a blessing. And we can find gratitude at any second. I mean, that sounds like almost like, I don't know, motivational or whatever.
Yeah.
But the truth is, we can actually find gratitude in any moment, in any second, which literally dissolves anxiety in the moment. It dissolves anger, which is, we are like literally angeraholics in so many respects in this country.
It's a powerful phrase, and I agree.
Yeah. So I wanted to come back to that thing you said, for those people who are, in wherever they are in the moment. Pain is it's a funny topic, because, is pain required? Do you think? I asked this question of a brain scientist researcher a couple of weeks ago. So I want to ask you, and I know it's not your area, but from the standpoint of an entrepreneur, of a CEO, of an executive, what is pain required, or is it optional? What do you think?
I think that if you avoid pain in any pursuit in life, and particularly in your career, I think you'll fall short of where you want to be. I don't know that it necessarily means that you'll experience pain, but if you go out of your way to avoid it, as many people do, as we all do sometimes, that you're almost certainly not going to end up where you want. I think it's a necessary, being open to it, accepting it, and surviving it is a necessary attitude towards being successful in life and in work.
I think this is what you said earlier. Like when you said, do the next right thing, Bill, and other people were questioning the wisdom of doing that next right thing. They were looking to avoid pain or more pain.
Yeah. You just want to, it's so difficult. It's funny. You and I had connected to talk about this energy book that I wrote, but I actually wrote a book. So before I wrote that energy book, I was practicing my writing, because I'm a very slow writer. I wanted to get up to speed. So I took all the notes I'd written for my two boys over their lifetimes and before they were born, and I assembled them into a book I gave them. And a couple of friends saw it, and they liked it so much that I ended up publishing it. And this is all the stuff we're talking about, is like the story of my friend in the military. That's in that book. And it's called Your Mountain is Waiting. And anyway, it's funny. It's wonderful to connect with you, Adam, because the way that you think about life mirrors a lot of the way I do. And I've never had the courage to sort of share it broadly. I'm much more of a nerd, and I'm a business model person. Those are the things that I'll share with the world. But I did write that book for them, and was convinced by them and others to make it available outside of just our family. But it's I think that there's big things like great adventures with great friends. And do the next right thing. These are really core principles that I distilled in writing that book. And I think it's so helpful for people to realize that they're not in these tough situations, not the only ones there, and others have been there. And once in a while, you'll come across someone whose point of view, your podcast, and others, that'll say, this is what I need to hear right now. and I'll push through it. And that's where I think great joy comes and great sense of reward. And it sounds like you and I are both at a very good point in our lives, but it's not always been that way. It's such an honor to be able to discuss the highs and the lows, and to remember that, and to meet you, to know that you've gone through your own stories is such a, I don't know, that's the only thing that when I think about, one of the things I said in that book, and I say all that, I always look back, I look forward and say, what are they going to put in my gravestone? Right. And then that simplifies so many of the decisions I make in life, because no one's gravestone I've ever seen has their net worth when they died. I can't recall ever seeing a gravestone that had the net worth. And so my wife and I have given away the bulk of our money, because what the heck are we going to do with the money? So we've given the bulk of it away, and it's never had the companies they took public, right? It doesn't have that on there. It doesn't, they reached a senior vice president of 100 Fortune 100. That's not on their gravestone, right? But what is captured there is the people that loved them and the person that they were. And so that exercise of looking forward has always been one of those powerful ways that I ask myself, is this really what I want to spend my energy on? And I think there's just life's crazy busy, and you get caught up in the moment, and you're chasing your career and the next big deal, and your kids trying to get into this school or just got in trouble in that way. And you're just, my wife and I are just disagreeing on this thing, and my neighbor just said something insulting or whatever. And sort of getting through those moments can just engulf your entire life. And I love those exercises where you step back and you say, well, let me think just for a moment about everything. And one of the points I make to all the people I've worked with, I do it myself, is if you're in a position in your career to allow for this, and we're going to start doing this at this venture firm I've joined, is take 1 or 2 days every quarter or twice a year, and shut off your email, go someplace where there's no distractions, no kids, no spouse, no cell phone calls, and go just think about the big questions. And once I got the hang of that, I actually wrote down, the way I survived all the stress of my job was I'd write down the things that were driving me nuts. I was like, if I don't solve this, it's going to be anxiety. I'd write them all down. And I knew that sometime in the next 3 months, I would have time to go focus on the questions. And psychologically, those things didn't just add up. They became cumulative. They became stuff that I could solve in the future. And I did.
Yeah. So it's so fascinating, right? That like questions and answers have a cause and effect relationship. And I think when people don't ask enough questions, like what you're talking about, as a process to ask, especially the questions you don't know the answers to, those are the best questions of all. But just to ask the question, to me, I don't know the timing of it, but I have faith. I truly do, that you can never ask a question, not receive an answer. I just don't know. We don't know when that answer is going to come.
I like that. Should have put that on my book.
Feel free on the next edition. You just stick that in there. Speaking of books, you've got a new book out called Freeing Energy. And I think this is a great segue into the little last piece of our talk today. Would you tell us a little bit about this book, Freeing Energy?
Yeah, I think there are two parts that are interesting, and to be brief about each is that, when I sold my company to IBM, I was sitting there doing all the interviews with the Wall Street Journal and the Financial Times, as they're saying, it became IBM's marketing cloud. And I wanted to remember the moment. So I stepped out of the room and went into a conference room by myself and was just thinking for a very brief moment, wow, I've got all this money now, and I've reached this high level in my career. And I was overwhelmed unexpectedly with the sense that I needed to do something that mattered with it. It wasn't because I was called to do something. I just was overwhelmed with the recognition of so many people I'd met that didn't have the financial comfort, didn't have the resume and the network, and were devoting their lives to something much more important than themselves or their career. And so I began a quest to find something that I could do that mattered a lot more than me. And we gave away the bulk of the money. And my wife had this thesis that if I had enough money not to have a job, that I would lose the fire under my ass. And she says, almost exactly what you said, Adam, is that, you're going to be boring if you have enough money to worry about managing your money. She says, you got to be worried about building something. And so I went and searched to find something that really mattered, that I could get my business head around. So I was looking for something that had three things. I was looking for something that would make the world better for my children. I was somewhat aware of climate change, but pollution and all that. Second of all, I had become aware through some travels of the billion people in the world that have no electricity, have no water. And the third is I wanted to do something to make a ton of money. And so I looked across those three, and I came across this idea of small scale electricity systems, microgrid, solar plus battery, whether it's a teeny solar battery system in a hut in Africa that you can buy for $5, or it's one that's powering a whole campus at a factory. But this is a single, I call it a Lego brick. I call it local energy. And the more I looked at it, the more despondent I got, because this is such a regulated industry that I thought you couldn't pull it off. And I almost gave up. But I kept pressing on it and finally figured out how you could take this idea and turn it into an incredibly exciting industry. And that's really what the book's about. And it's written for entrepreneurs and innovators, and to some degree, advocates who want to have cleaner, cheaper, more resilient electricity systems. And the timing, I didn't know, but the timing has turned out to be fantastic. Since I finished writing the book, the whole Texas grid went down for a week. California's shutting off their grid all over the place. Louisiana went down New Orleans went down. We're going to have some problems this winter for sure across the world. We're watching the Ukraine get their power shut off. So this idea of resiliency is moving beyond a existential question into something that's very real for a lot of people. And so, plus the solar and batteries have become so daggone cheap that it's now affordable for people to do this. It's actually cheaper than buying electricity from the grid. So this whole book was born, and it had been such a journey and such an enjoyable time. I interviewed 400 people all over the world. I climbed to the top of a wind turbine. I sat in the headquarters of the largest solar company in the world in China. Sat in mud huts in Africa. Went to European solar manufacturers. I was having a great time, actually. But the book that came out of it had I'd like to think, some pretty big ideas that are been fascinating. I finished it about a year ago, and I'm getting more and more calls now than when the book came out.
Yes.
And I think the idea is starting to resonate. The U.S. government, for the first time, and since I think it was President Bush back then, energy wasn't political like it is now. And President Bush passed a bunch of laws to make renewable energy affordable. And they were re-upped by both parties, presidents. But this time around, the U.S. government's leaning into it in a way that no other world government has. This Inflation, funny name, Inflation Reduction Act, doesn't do a lot of inflation reduction, but it's a fantastic for clean energy. And it's going to put it's going to create millions of U.S. jobs, good paying jobs. It's going to put the U.S. dependence on China and Saudi Arabia substantially smaller. And while it is still politicized to some degree, you notice it doesn't get the same political acrimony that some of the other things we see up in DC. So I'm excited. This is a great time to be thinking about clean energy. And it's a great time to think about small clean energy. And that's really what the book was, a bit of a manifesto on how to do that and do it well. And I've been very flattered at the attention and the recognition the ideas have gotten.
Wow. Yeah. Environmental sustainability is such an important topic. I think you're right. There's some policy.
Well, I don't want to cut you off, but that's actually exactly why I wrote the book, because everyone leans into it's an environmental thing. It's not. This is the whole point of the book. It doesn't use the term climate change anywhere in the book.
Yes.
The entire point is this is a fantastic business. So yes, the industry was born out of environmentalism, but leave that aside. You could hate the environment. You could want to shoot all the baby seals that you're going to see. But if you want to get rich, this is the hottest industry in the history of humanity to make a lot of money.
Well, it's interesting. I don't know when there was the two things got conflated to begin with, because how is it that something that's environmental, or that you would use the word environment, gets the rap somehow that it's not profitable, or that it wasn't not for profit even,
20 years ago, it wasn't. The only reason you would build a large wind farm 20 years ago was the government was putting pretty huge subsidies in, even more subsidies than the government gets for fossil fuels. And the renewable subsidies have gotten smaller and smaller. But what they did in this big law they passed a couple of months ago was they broadened the number of things. It's not just solar and wind. It's all kinds of energy production and energy distribution. So it's a great time to be in energy. And that's, hopefully the book will be interesting and inspiring to some folks that who I wrote it for. Actually, the opening of the book says it's written for the 10,000 entrepreneurs and innovators that have not yet entered the industry, but who will join the industry and change the world.
So my last question is going to be a play on that, which is because our for the most part, I would say our company is committed to wellness in the workplace. That's why we speak about resilience, but resilience is just one aspect of what it means to create workplaces of well-being. I want to know how it is that you renew your energy. So we talk about renewables, we talk about clean energy. We have to constantly be refreshing, recharging, and resetting and restoring ourselves, regenerating ourselves. And I speak to renewable companies. I get called in for that conversation quite frequently, which is fun. That's a total blast, right? So my question to you is, what's something that you do that is a way that you create your own renewable energy? Maybe it's a practice, a ritual, or something like that. But I want to get your philosophy on that. Someone
told me a couple of years ago brilliantly that the definition of an extrovert versus an introvert is that an extrovert recharges their battery with people and an introvert recharges their battery by themselves. And I am a hardcore introvert. I've spent my life, acting like I'm not, but I am. And so these times I mentioned earlier, when I get by myself, isn't just for ideation and big thinking, but it recharges my batteries. It takes energy to talk to people for me. And if I get away from all human beings for a couple of days, that's probably the biggest thing that I do. But when I'm not quite as busy, which has been most of my life, but on those rare occasions of my life, I'm not quite as busy as I am. I love to build things with wood and metal and just sort of hammer, nail, saw, those things. That brings me to spend a few hours in a wood shop and come out with something that didn't exist before is a source of great reward and battery charging for me.
I love it, buddy. And you said it earlier, there's a lot you and I have in common, interestingly enough. And despite appearances, that I regain my energy in solitary practice or in small settings. So it's funny. This I think you put it really well there. The objective truth is that I prefer to be alone, and it's not because I don't love people or want to be around people.
Exactly.
I love people. I want to be. It's just that I know that when I am depleted, when I'm tired, that I can go to a source of power for me that will restore me well beyond whatever capacity is needed. And I think people don't often, because again, through youth or through inexperience or just having not suffered, maybe not having had those moments of pain, they don't know themselves well enough to know how to recharge. And that's why anxiety and exhaustion and things like the Great Resignation or quietly quitting, these are just terms that are used when people are suffering.
Yeah.
And it's great amount of suffering, which is optional. And I know that might sound, a bit harsh even, but to a great degree, that's why I asked you that question. Whose heart, is it hardest to deal with yourself or to deal with others? To me, my philosophy on this is that it's hardest to deal with ourselves. But when we learn how to deal with those challenges we're experiencing, like emotions that feel funky or that we don't want to experience, so we repress them or suppress them, or we learn that from our parents. You should never show your anger, or you should never show your sadness, or your
right.
Well, so that's a problem that can be resolved by going inside. And we don't go inside best when we're in a crowd of 10,000 people. We do that on our
wise words. Yeah, I agree.
Well, Bill, I again couldn't have enjoyed this conversation anymore.
Thank you.
Really.
Same.
So thank you for
back at you.
Giving me a great morning. I love this. So I would love, as we always do, to make a request. This is to the audience here. So if you really enjoyed listening to what Bill had to say today, and I can't imagine not, first of all, go out and get Freeing Energy. Go to freeingenergy.com. We don't typically say it's in the show notes, but I rarely kind of do it that way. But I do think this is a book you should go check out and
change the world.
Absolutely. And there will be show notes about more of what Bill is up to, et cetera. We would love to hear from you. So if you've got a comment for us or even a question, I can get that question to Bill. It's easy. You can get it to him too, usual social channels and whatnot. But you can go to adammarkel.com/podcast. Leave a comment. Let us know what you thought of this conversation. Leave a review because, hey, I don't know algorithmically how it works. I just know that when you all give this thing like a great rating, 5 stars is terrific, then somehow or another more people get to listen. And so if you think more people should be listening and you're willing to aid us in that endeavor, we'd appreciate that great review as well. And lastly, I would say this, wherever you are in this moment, if things are feel great or they feel not so great, that thing that you've decided in your head, like this sucks or that's great or whatever, that may not be the objective truth. And you may not know what the objective truth is for 10 years or 20 years. So right now, do what you can to just take care of yourself, restore your energy, however it is you do that, around a lot of other people or in some other solitary way, but renew your energy. And that way you get to keep showing up each day. And maybe someday, just like Bill said, you go through the crucible just by doing the right thing.
Thanks for listening. We hope you now have even more tools and greater insights to build resilience and become change-proof. Remember to leave a review on Apple Podcasts, and you may be featured in an upcoming episode. For more resilience tips and strategies, including support for building change-proof teams, visit adammarkel.com. To get your own free resilience assessment, go to rankmyresilience.com.